What's going on? This is Ryan with Automatic Comics, and up next we are going to talk about the top 10 Silver Age Grails and which ones look like they might be undervalued right now. Stay tuned. Alright, so before we get started, please remember to hit that like button and hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. So I've done some videos like this in the past where I've looked at specific runs like Amazing Spider-Man, XMen, Fantastic Four, and picked out what I thought were the top 10 keys in those runs and which ones look to be undervalued based on recent prices and prices from a year ago. So what I thought would be fun to do with this is actually look across DC and Marvel and multiple different runs, different books, and look at the top 10 just Grail level books and what they've done over the last year, and try to identify some that maybe are a little undervalued right now. Now I also have 2 honorable mentions, so I've actually got 12 books that I'm going to go over. And this is my ordering of what I consider to be that top 10 order. If you've got a disagreement, if you think it's something else, please feel free to make a comment in the comments section. And remember, it's just all in fun, so don't hate on me too much if they aren't in the order that you think they should be. Now for pricing, I did what I've done in prior videos as well. I looked at the most common grade, and then I looked at their price about a year ago and the price currently. Now you got to remember, these are these more like Grail level type books. They don't sell quite as often, especially in a specific grade, so that does require a little bit of estimating, but I feel like it's close enough to give us a good picture of what's going on with these books. So with that, I'm going to start with the honorable mentions. And honorable mention number 1 is Avengers #1, book from 1963. And the reason I picked this one, first appearance of the Avengers, cover that is very similar to the initial battle with the Avengers and Loki in that first MCU Avengers movie. And I put this one as an honorable mention, similar to the reason my other book that I have on here as an honorable mention is because it's not really the first appearance of a specific character. It's first appearance of a team, and with respect to value, it doesn't quite hold up or compare to most of the other books that are on this list. Now, the most common grade for this book is a 3.0, and there are 392 Blue Label universal copies in a 3.0. Total census for this book is 4,595, with 3,349 being those Blue Label or universal copies. So quite a few of those books out there. And the price a year ago for this 3.0 was $2,150. Price today is $4,800. So that was with a price on August 3rd of $4,750 and $4,920 on June 28th. And there's definitely been some price compression with this book in the $3 to $3.5 range, with a $4,800 sale for a 3.5 on July 26th, as well as a $4,080 sale for a 3.5 on August 2nd. So this is where I got my price from for that. Now this is a price increase of 125%, so a very big move for this book. Especially for a book, again, that's multiple thousands of dollars. So with that, let's move on to the honorable mention number 2. And based on what I said earlier, you might guess what this one is, and this is Brave and the Bold, number 28, book from 1960. And this, again, is the first appearance of a team. It's the first appearance of the Justice League. It's also the first appearance of Starro, who has an appearance in the recent Suicide Squad movie. And again, the reason I have this on here as an honorable mention is it's a team, not an individual character. Also, the price just doesn't really compare with a lot of the other books that are on this list. But it is a very important book for the Silver Age. Now, the most common grade for this is a 3.0. Only 117 Blue Labels in that 3.0 grade, and the total census count is just 1,337, with 1,133 being those universal copies. So much less common book. This is an earlier Silver Age book, going back to 1960, even a couple years before we saw Amazing Fantasy 15. Now, the price a year ago, just $1,700, which really doesn't seem like all that much for a book this important. Current price is $2,900, with a $2,900 sale on May 3rd, and a 2.5 sold for $2,200 on June 14th, and a 3.5 sold for $3,720 on June 28th. So now, this book isn't quite as common, sells less often, so that's why I had to really look at other grades around this book. Now, that's a price increase of 70%, which For a DC book, from what I've seen recently, that's a pretty big move, but it's not surprising to see that it's moved less than Avengers 1. It's just what we've seen for years, where Marvel books just tend to move more than DC books when they're in similar price range, similar types of keys. Now, still has been moving up. I mean, definitely up 70%, but not as much as Avengers number 1. All right, so now let's get into the official list. And we'll start with number 10. And this is Amazing Spider-Man number 1, book from 1963. And I picked this because this is the first issue of Amazing Spider-Man's very long, continuous running title, and arguably the most popular character in the Marvel Universe. And I feel like maybe this is a slightly controversial pick because it's really not his first appearance, but I just think this is too important and too valuable of a book to not include on this list. Now, the most common grade is a 3.0 with 310 blue label copies. Total census, there's a lot of these. There's 4,247 graded copies with 2,922 blue labels. Now, the price to go was $6,300. This is not a cheap book. The current price, $11,000. It broke into that 5-figure range. And again, this is a tough book to price, doesn't sell all that often. It had a $12,600 sale on May 31st, but then a 3.5 sold for $10,800 on August 2nd. Now, I think that person probably got a great deal, but that means the prices do seem to be coming down a little bit. And a 2.5 sold for $10,200 on June 28th, so that's where I came up with this $11,000 price. Now, that's a price increase of 75%. At its peak sale, it had been up 100%, but it has pulled back a little bit, but still up 75% from this time last year. Right, now number 9. This is Showcase number 22, book from 1959. And this is the first appearance of Hal Jordan as the Green Lantern. And for DC, this is one of their huge Silver Age keys. And that's the tough part with DC. A lot of their big keys really came in the Golden Age. A lot of the big first appearances were Golden Age. There aren't as many in the Silver Age. Now, the most common grade is a 3.0, only 130 blue labels. And the total census is just 1,177 with 966 blue label copies. So that's a really rare book in comparison to a lot of what you'll see with Marvel. I mean, less than 1,000 universal copies on the census. Now, the price was $2,500, so definitely on the lower end of the books that I'll be talking about here. The current price is $4,500. Had a $5,000 sale on June 28th, but I'm a little suspect of that sale. I'm not sure how much I believe that one. I did confirm it on Terapeak, the eBay sales tool, but I don't know. So then there was a $3,360 sale on June 21st, and a 2.5 sold for $2,760 on July 26th. So, I mean, I'd estimate at $4,500 based on that $5,000 sale, but still a little suspect of that sale. Now, with that though, that's an 80% increase in the price of this book, which is just huge for DC in comparison, more than Amazing Spider-Man number 1. Now, there has been a lot of hype around Green Lantern because of the show that's going to be coming out on HBO, but at least according to what we've heard, it doesn't actually have Hal Jordan in it. But this is what I've talked about before. It doesn't necessarily matter if that character is there. If Hal Jordan is the one that people really associate with Green Lantern, that's what's going to drive people towards that book. People think of Green Lantern, they often think of Hal Jordan, and then they're going to be looking at Showcase number 22. All right, now number 8. This one, I picked Fantastic Four number 5, book from 1962, and this is the only villain-centered book that I have on this list. This is the first appearance of Doctor Doom, and just one of the most iconic and popular villains from Marvel. And this is definitely one that's on here because of the price increases that we've seen in the last 6 months. I probably would not have included it if that demand really hadn't increased more recently. Now, the most common grade is a 4.0. There's 173 blue labels in a 4.0. The total census count for this book is 1,858 with 1,447 universal copies. And that's a relatively low census count for a book that is really this popular. Now, price a year ago for a 4.0 was $4,600. Price today is $11,400. There was an $11,100 sale on August 2nd and an $11,779 sale on June 30th. The 3.5 also sold for $9,300 on July 12th. So just The book has gotten really, really expensive. That is a price increase of 150%. Just huge move for a book like this, where it's pushed this most common grade up into 5 figures. And this is all on speculation. We don't know anything about this character, if they're going to be showing up in the MCU. It's just with people knowing that the Fantastic Four are coming, they assume that we're also going to get Doctor Doom. But we have no idea when that could be. It could be years from now. Alright, so now number 7. Got Journey into Mystery number 83. It's from 1962. It's the first appearance of Thor, and this book has become much more popular over the last few years with his use in the MCU, especially since Thor Ragnarok. That movie, I think, really catapulted his popularity. Now, the Journey into Mystery run in general isn't quite as popular as some of the other titles, and part of what hurts the first appearance for this character is that it's not in issue number 1. You know, it's this issue 83 that's just kind of in the middle of this other run of books. Now, the most common grade is a 4.0, and there are 176 blue labels of this book. Total census is 2,097 with 1,544 blue labels. So again, relatively low, almost identical in numbers to Fantastic Four number 5. Now, price a year ago for this book was $6,500. Price today, $14,500. Now, there was a $13,000 sale on June 3rd, but a 4.5 sold for $15,600 on June 28th, and a 3.5 sold for $15,000 on June 9th. So this price is really compressed around this grade, but I mean, that's a big move for this book, up 125% in the last year. And the thing that makes me a little nervous with this book is that I don't know how much we're going to continue to see this character after the next Thor movie, Thor Love and Thunder. I mean, it is definitely a blue chip Marvel book, but if we start not seeing that character quite as often, I think it's possible that it may end up losing some value moving forward. But so that one, it is one that makes me a little bit nervous with how much it is up and the questions that we have maybe with the future of that character. All right, number 6, and this is Tales of Suspense number 39, 1963. It's the first appearance of Iron Man, and like Thor, this is another character that has gotten much more popular because of the MCU. Also, like Thor, it suffers from the fact that his first appearance is not in an issue number 1. It's this issue 39, right in the middle of what used to be basically a monster title. It was Monsters, essentially, before this came out. Now, the most common grade is also a 4.0 with 164 blue labels. The total census is 2,419 with 1,719 blue labels. Again, relatively low, but a little more than Journey into Mystery number 83. Now, the price a year ago, very similar to Journey into Mystery at $6,300. The current price is $11,500 with an $11,100 sale on May 31st, but a 4.5 sold for $12,967 on July 18th, and a 3.5 sold for $10,500 on July 26th. Now, this is a price increase of 85%, and looks like a little bit of an underperformer compared to the other books we've seen, but this is, again, one of those books that makes me a little nervous. It is a blue chip key, definitely, but Iron Man was killed off in the last Avengers movie, and so that's a character we probably just won't see as much. They're likely going to be moving on to other versions of Iron Man, like Riri, and so we'll just have to see what happens with that. Again, it's a book that hasn't moved up quite as much. Maybe that's why it hasn't moved up as much as Thor, because the character doesn't have as much of a future in the MCU, but we'll have to see what happens with it moving forward. All right, number 5. This is Incredible Hulk number 1, book from 1962. It's the first appearance of Bruce Banner as the Hulk, and I love this cover. I think it is one of the great first appearance covers. It's such a unique color, so it's not as bright or flashy as a lot of the other first appearance covers, but most common grade is a 3.0. There are only 148 blue labels in that 3.0. The census is just 1,877 with 1,299 blue labels, so very low compared to the other big Marvel keys. Now, the price a year ago was $9,500. Current price, $18,600. And this one doesn't sell quite as often. It's a little more difficult to price, There was an $18,600 sale on June 21st, which is really what's driving that for me. But a 3.5 also sold for $21,000 on July 13th, and a 2.5 sold for $16,200 on May 31st. So this book really has gotten very expensive lately. Used to be a pretty flat book, really hadn't moved all that much. Now this is a price increase of 95%, and just considering the base value of this book, that is a substantial move. But this is just another book that I kind of wonder about the long-term use of this character in the MCU. I don't know how much longer we'll continue to see the Hulk used, or if they're going to end up having to switch who the actor is. I don't know what the future really is with that character. They've always struggled to do individual movies with that character. Now you could argue that Thor Ragnarok was a Hulk movie. I mean, it was just as much a Hulk movie as a Thor movie, and I think they did a fantastic job with that character in that movie, and I think that's another big part of what increased the demand for that book, for that character, because that was just a turning point for Thor and I think for Hulk. So just an expensive book though. A very expensive book, but one that if you can get that book, I think it's an incredible book to own. All right, now number 4, got XMen number 1, 1963. First appearance of X-Men, and also the first appearance of Magneto. So this is another one where you get a huge villain, but he's also sharing that first appearance with the X-Men. Now, personally for me, this is not one of my favorite covers. I don't know, maybe if I had one in my hands it would change my opinion a little bit, but just something about that kind of cream to white background, it just never really looks all that clean to me, but that's just me. So the most common grade for this book is a 3.0. There are 430 copies in a 3.0. Total census, 5,344 with 3,843 blue labels. So this book has a lot of copies out there. This is the highest census count really of these big keys for Marvel and DC. Now, price a year ago for this book, $5,200 in a 3.0. Current price, $14,000. Now, there had been some higher sales. It had had a $15,600 sale on June 28th and a $16,800 sale on May 31st. But a 2.5 sold for $13,560 on July 26th, and a 3.5 sold for $13,800 on July 19th. So I think this book really has been coming down lately, but from where it is a year ago, it is still up an absolute ton. From that price a year ago, even at the $14,000 mark, it is still up 170%. That is more than any other book that I will talk about on this list. And that's just incredible. I mean, incredible, especially considering we don't have any news or anything about these characters yet. Now, I'm sure we'll see them, but we still have nothing on this, and so it is complete speculation that has pushed that book up to these just incredible numbers. All right, number 3, and this is Fantastic Four number 1, book from 1961. It's the first appearance of the Fantastic Four, and this is the book that really saved Marvel. I mean, it's the one that jump-started them into the superheroes out of the monster-type books, and the most common grade is a 3.0 with 217 blue labels. The total census is 2,573 with 1,723 universal copies. Now, it's actually a decent amount of these compared to some of the other keys, but still a relatively low number for a book that's going to be this in demand. Now, the price a year ago for this book in a 3.0 was $9,200. Current price, just about $17,500. Now, this one does not have a lot of sales to go on. Requires some estimating. A 3.0 did sell for $16,100 on May 10th, but a 3.5 sold for $20,940 on June 30th, and a 2.0 sold for $12,000 on June 28th. So that's what drove my price estimate of $17,500. Now, this is a price increase of 90%, and I've talked about this one before. That seems undervalued to me, especially since this is actually a group of characters that we know are coming to the MCU. They have a movie that's already been announced, and so we know they're coming. And so when you've got X-Men number 1 being up 170%, and this book being up 90%, that kind of seems like a deal to me. But, well, we'll talk about those at the end. All right, now number 2, and we're actually going to DC, and this is Showcase number 4 from 1956. This is the first appearance of Barry Allen as the Flash, and this is the book that jump-started Heroes again and really is considered to have kicked off the Silver Age. Now, you can see this book is much earlier than the other books that I've talked about here, even 3 years before Green Lantern's first appearance and 5 years before Fantastic Four #1. Now, the most common grade is actually a little higher. It's a 4.5, but it's partly because there are just so few of these books out there. There are 44 blue labels in a 4.5, and a 3.0 is really close with just 42. Now, the total census for this book is just 528 copies, with just 372 blue labels. So incredibly low numbers, and really shows how rare, how uncommon this book is in comparison to the other big key issues from the Silver Age. Now, the price a year ago in a 4.5 was $18,000. Current price is about $27,000. Now, this has to really be done based on estimating from other sales, because like I said, there's so few of these, they just don't sell very often. A 3.5 sold for $17,500 on June 13th, and a 2.0 sold for $13,200 on June 19th, and a 5.0 sold for $31,200 on June 19th. That was a really big sale. So this is a price increase of 50%, much lower than what we've seen with the other books that I've talked about on this list, but it's also a much more expensive book, a lot higher baseline. But before this recent spike, this book had actually been down. A 3.0 had sold for $11,200 on April 15th, and a 4.5, the book I was talking about here, had sold for $13,800 on March 8th. So it had been at $18,000 a year ago. It was down to $13,800 before we had this kind of recent craziness spike in the comic market. So it really does show you how DC generally underperforms when you're talking about it versus Marvel. I mean, before this recent spike, actually down over the last year. Right. Now, #1, and I think there's probably not too much surprise about this one. This is Amazing Fantasy #15 from 1962, and this book really is just the king of the Silver Age. It's the first appearance of SpiderMan, and I know it can sometimes be a bit controversial between picks #1 and #2. Some people would put Showcase #4 at #1 just because it's the book that kicked off the Silver Age, but I think the first appearance of Spider-Man is just too important of a book, just so much significance, and just such a valuable book in comparison that it's got to be in that #1 slot. Now, most common grade is a 3.0 with 257 blue label copies. Total census, actually there's quite a few of them. There's 3,465 with 2,215 blue labels. Now, part of the reason there are so many out there is that it has so much value in any grade that people will get them graded regardless. There are over 900 restored copies. So there are just a lot of different types. There's restored and qualified books that are definitely going to show up more often than with other books. Now, the price a year ago in this 3.0, $19,000. Current price, $33,000. Now, a 3.0 did sell for $32,400 on July 19th, but a 2.5 sold for $30,000 on August 2nd, and a 2.0 sold for $26,400 on June 28th. So that's where I came to $33,000. And that's a price increase of 75%. This is a much more expensive book, so you tend to not see as big of moves compared to other books that might be less expensive, but still, 75%, that's a big move for a book this expensive. But one thing I do want to mention with this book is that it hasn't followed the same path as a lot of the other books on this list. Most of these other books have generally had kind of a smooth increase in price over the last number of years and just a huge spike very recently. But Amazing Fantasy 15 was actually pretty expensive a few years ago. So if we jump back to 2015, this book was selling at around $11,000, between about $10,000 and $12,000. But in 2017, it had a sale of $18,950 in a 3.0. Then in 2018, it fell as low as $10,000. Then it had multiple sales at $21,000 later that year, then back down to $13,000 in 2019, then back up to $19,000 in 2020, and as recent as November of 2020 had a sale at $14,700. This is all at that 3.0 grade. And so I think it's important to point out with these books, with these blue chip books, that you should be aware of the history of these prices of these books. It just kind of reminds you that it's not always a one-way trip straight up. they can go down in value despite being these extremely important books. And so just don't necessarily think that just because you buy one of these that it's guaranteed to go up in the future. You will likely see increases over time. But with this book, there was a sale of 18,950 back in 2017 and then 14,700 in 2020. I mean, that's a big drop over 3 years. So that's why it's just something I'd like to point out, that it's not always just this one-way trip up with these books. Now, the next thing that I did was I wanted to put all of these on a single chart next to each other. Now, I know this may be kind of an eye chart for, for some people. I try to make it as big as possible, but I've got all the books I talked about from number 1 through to the honorable mentions, showing the grades for each one that I looked at and their current prices, their prices from a year ago, and then how much they had changed in percent, and their census, their total universal copy census. So you can kind of really look at each one of these next to each other and see how many books are out there, how rare that book is, how much it has changed in price. And then what I did is I ordered them based on the percent change in value for those books. And so you can see that the lowest percent change was that Showcase number 4, and the biggest percent change was that XMen number 1. So 50% all the way up to 170%. And it's not a real surprise that the two lowest performers are DC books. That's generally what we've seen. Showcase 22, because we've got that Green Lantern show coming out, does seem to have gone up a little more than some of the other DC books. But the other thing I did here is you can see I highlighted a few books on this list. And these are the books that I think are the undervalued books out of these big Silver Age keys. Now, I know that these aren't books that everybody can buy, or most people can even buy. They are all very expensive, except for Showcase 22. It's a little more affordable. I mean, these are all books that are getting into that 5-figure plus range. But the ones that I thought were the most undervalued on this list are Amazing Fantasy 15, up just 75%, with 2,200 universal copies. So, I mean, there are quite a few of them out there, but I don't think there's a book out there of the Silver Age major keys that's in more demand than AF-15. Then next one on there, Amazing Spider-Man number 1. And this is one that, again, is only up 75%, is a great alternative to AF-15. So if you don't have 30 grand to spend, maybe you have 10 grand to spend on this book. And so I think that with Spider-Man being just the most popular character in the Marvel Universe, that those two books, having not moved up as much as a lot of the other keys on this list, tells me that they are likely a little undervalued. Now, next one, Showcase 22. And this is one that is only up 80%, and I think an important thing with this book, and the reason why I identified this book, is that it's got a very low census count. You're at just 966 Blue Label copies, less than 1,000. So even if there is a little less demand for those DC books, there are a lot less copies of them out there. And depending on how that show does with HBO, it's possible we could see a return of Hal Jordan. You could see more use of Green Lantern. And so then that could really move that book up. And this is also one that has a little lower buy-in. It's that 3.0 is $4,500. You're not having to spend into the 5 figures, over 10 grand for a book. So definitely a book that I think is a good one. Now, the book that I think is the best buy on this list, and I talked about this as well in my Fantastic Four top 10 video that I did, is Fantastic Four number 1. Now, you can see it's up 90%, but it's up so much less than these other big Silver Age keys that either don't have movies coming or have characters that are likely winding down in the MCU, like Hulk, Thor, the Avengers as a team. Then we don't even have any news yet for the X-Men or for Doctor Doom, but we know that Fantastic Four is coming. We know they're coming. And so this book being that low, kind of sitting on the middle of the list, just for me is a book that I think is primed to move up. Now, I know it's an expensive book, so that's always a tough thing. I mean, even in the lowest grades, it's starting to get up above 10 grand. So now, I don't have a copy of Fantastic Four number 1. I wish I did. I think this is going to be a book that's going to just keep going up, especially with the future of that team in the MCU. So that is definitely my number 1 recommendation on this list. But I really think AF-15, Amazing Spider-Man number 1, Showcase 22, and Fantastic Four number 1 are, of these just monsters Silver Age books, are the 4 that really haven't moved quite as much as the others and deserve to. So they're the ones that I would really be watching out for. All right, so with that, that's my list. That's my top 10 with the honorable mentions and the books that I think haven't performed as well recently, might be worth trying to pick up if you've got the funds available to go after one of those books. You could also consider looking at things like restored copies, lower grades, any of that. But if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. I've got more videos over here if you'd like to click on those and watch some more of my videos, and the subscription button right here if you'd like to subscribe to the channel. I would really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next video.